Hello, grade 9s. Welcome to our next lesson. The lesson today is still on factoring, so this is called factoring fully. Now, what we're doing is we're putting two concepts together, the last two lessons that we've had together. So if you have not completed the lesson on the greatest common factor and also on factoring trinomials, okay, you're going to want to go back and you're going to have to follow and learn those two concepts first, because now we're putting them together in one question. Okay, so for those of you who are ready, you've done the first two lessons. The first thing that we're going to look for is we're going to look for the greatest common factor, and we're going to factor that out. So if you remember from doing that lesson and working on that assignment, the greatest common factor would be in front of a bracket, and then the what's left after we've taken the greatest common factor out goes into a bracket. So the GCF is shown multiplying the bracket of what's left. Now, the second step is to factor the trinomial, and the trinomial is going to be inside the bracket. You're going to have a trinomial that's left there. And remember that trinomial was broken down into two binomials. So the what's left was one bracket with a trinomial. It's now going to become two brackets with binomials, right? A binomial and another binomial. And you're going to have the GCF that comes down in front. So instead of the GCF just multiplying the trinomial, the GCF is now going to multiply the two binomials broken down. All right, let's look at the first question. So we need to break these down into their factors. Now, 5 is a prime number, so it doesn't break down any farther. X squared breaks down into x times x. 25 breaks down into 5 times 5. And x doesn't break down any farther. 30 breaks down into 5 times 6. Now, some of you are writing 6 down there, but 6 is not a prime number, so it needs to be broken down into 2 times 3. Now, I'm hoping that you recognize now that there is a 5 that is in each of these. Now, this one has 2 5s, but at most is 1 5 in each. So the 5 is going to be the greatest common factor because there's not an x in all of them. So we're going to factor that out. Okay? So the what's left goes into a bracket. Now the what's left is what we didn't cross out here as the greatest common factor. So in the first term we have x times x. We're going to put that back together. X times x is going to become x squared. Okay? Then we have an add sign. Then the next thing that's left is a 5 and an x. We're going to put those together, and 5 times x simply gives us 5x. And then we're going to put the last two parts together, right? The 2 times the 3 is going to give us a 6. Now, this has, again, an add in between those terms. So that was, to do that was the assignment from 2 weeks ago, right? Finding the greatest common factor. But now we need to look at the trinomial, the what's left here, and we're going to break that down into two binomials, okay? And you're still going to have the greatest common factor in front, but instead of the trinomial, you're going to have two binomials. And those two binomials are going to come from product and sum, and that was last week's lesson. So remember that the constant, this was our product, right? The constant is the plain number, so our product is positive 6. The coefficient, that's the number in front of the middle term. That there is our sum, including the sign. So that's positive 6 as a product and positive 5 as a sum. Now, how do we get positive 6? Well, it could be 1 times 6. If you recognize that, that would add to give you 7, right? You could have negative 1 times negative 6, but when we add that, it's just going to change the sign, okay? Then what do we have? We have 2 times 3 also gives us 6. When we add that, we get 5. Bang, we've got the numbers we want. Now remember, the signs are important. Those are going to be positive 2 and positive 3. Multiply to give you positive 6, but they also add to give you positive 5. So now these two numbers, right, are the two numbers that go into our binomial. So we're going to have positive 2 as one of them and positive 3 as the other. The order doesn't matter. You could switch the order around. And then you look at the x, right? How do you get x squared? Well, that comes from x times x. So you're going to have an x in the first term of both of those binomials. Now, this is going to be worth 3 marks, okay? So 1 mark for getting the GCF, and then 1 mark for each of the binomials, okay? So 3 marks there for these questions. Okay, let's look at a second example. Let's factor down the first term. So x cubed comes from x times x times x, right? 5 is a prime number, so it doesn't break down, and x squared breaks down into x times x. 14 breaks down into 2 times 7, and x doesn't break down any farther. Okay, so what's common there? What I see as common is, in fact, 1x in each of them. So that 1x is going to be our GCF. That goes at the front. And then the what's left goes in the bracket. So what we have here is x times x, which gives us the x squared. And then here we've got a plus in between, so that's going to be a plus. And then we got 5 and an x. When we multiply that, that gives us our middle term, which is 5x. And then we got 2 times 7 left, and that comes down to be our last term, which is 14. And now there's a subtract in between there. Okay, now we need to go farther, right? We need to break this down into 2 binomials. Now we're still going to have our GCF of x in front. And our binomials come from negative 14 being the product. Okay, so that's going to be negative 14 here. And then positive 5, that's going to be our sum. Okay. So how do we get 14? Well, 1 times 14. Well, we need negative 14. So in order to get a negative, remember you have to have 1 positive and 1 negative. So let's make the first one positive and the second one negative. So positive 1 added to negative 14 is going to give us negative 13. Well, that's not right. Okay, what's another possible combination? Well, 2 and 7 multiplied to give you 14. We have to make 1 positive and 1 negative. So now when we add positive 2 and negative 7, we get negative 5. Well, we've got the right number 5, but we got the wrong sign. So just switch the order. Make that negative 2 times positive 7, and that gives you the proper positive 5. Okay, so these are the 2 numbers, negative 2 and positive 5, that go into our 2 binomials. So negative 2 and positive 5. And then we just go to the first term here, and it's x squared, which comes from x times x. So the first term of each binomial is going to be 1 of each of those x's. Okay, again, 1 mark for our GCF, 1 mark for each binomial being correct. Okay, let's move on to a third example. Okay, break it down into its factors. So 3 is prime, and then y cubed is y times y times y. 9 breaks down into 3 times 3, and y squared breaks down into y times y. The last term, 3 is prime, and y doesn't break down. So now what do we have that's common? Okay, I see a 3 in each of those. So 3 is our GCF. But I also see a y in each of those. So 3 times y gives us 3y. That's our GCF. The what's left goes to become our trinomial. So our first term has y times y, which is y squared. Then we have an add sign. Our second term, what's left is 3 and y. So 3 times y is 3y. Then we have a subtract. Now, there's nothing left here, okay? We have to remember that we still need a trinomial when we find a GCF. So, in fact, what's left there is, in fact, a 1, because we could take 3 and we could break it down into 1 times 3. So when we take the 3 out, we still have the 1 left, because really what we're doing is we're dividing. 3 divides by 3 to give us 1y squared, right? 9 divides by 3 to give us 3y squareds, okay? Negative 3y divides by 3 to give us a negative 1y, okay? And then we factored the y out. Okay, so now, this isn't going to work. So let's look at this. Let's find what multiplies to, this is our product, which is negative 1, and this is our sum, right, which is positive 3. So how do we get negative 1? Well, the only way to get negative 1 is going to be 1 times 1, and one of them has to be negative and one of them has to be positive. Well, what do we get when we add negative 1 and positive 1? We end up with a 0. Now, that's not the number we're looking for. So in some cases, like this one, the trinomial does not factor any farther. So this one is going to be a final answer of 3y times y squared plus 3y minus 1. This does not factor any farther. So a question that will not factor any farther is going to be worth 2 marks. 1 for the greatest common factor and 1 for the trinomial of the what's left. Okay? So this one does not factor farther than the GCF, right? So the trinomial didn't factor any farther. Okay, one last one, okay? And the reason I'm giving you this is because we got this negative sign in the first term. If we have a negative in the first term, I've said before when we were doing GCF, I want us to factor that out. And that's because it's going to make it so much easier for us to be able to break down the what's left trinomial. So because this is a negative, we're going to factor out a negative. So we know our GCF is going to be a negative, okay? But let's just break this down now to what the factors are. So what do we have? We have x times x, because that's x squared times y. And 8 breaks down into 2 times 4, but 4 is not prime, so we break that down into 2 times 2. And then we've got x times y for the xy. 12 breaks down into 2 times 6, but 6 isn't prime, so 6 breaks down into 2 times 3. And then we've got our y. So what's common? What's common is I see a y in each, okay? So we're going to factor out the y, but we're also going to factor out the negative, okay? So when we factor out the negative, it's like we're going to be dividing each of those terms by a negative. So when you divide by a negative, everything changes its sign. So a negative divides by a negative to give us the first term, which is going to be a positive. And what's left is x times x, so that's positive x squared. And then a positive divides by a negative to give us a negative. Oops. A positive divides by a negative to give us a negative. And then what's left? 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8 times x gives us 8x. And then a negative divides by a negative to give us a positive. And then what's left is 2 times 2, which is 4 times 3 is 12. So there's our trinomial. We've only got one common factor of y, but we factored the negative out because it was in the first term. So when we take the negative out of the first term, it makes this first term positive. It just makes it so much easier for us to be able to factor this trinomial if that first term is positive. Okay? And when we do that, the first term becomes positive in this case. The second term was a positive, it becomes a negative. The third term was a negative, it becomes a positive. So all of those are just their opposite sign when we take the negative out. Okay, so now we're going to break this down, right? Negative y is our GCF, but that trinomial is going to break down into two binomials. So this is our product, right? Positive 12. And negative 8, that is our sum, okay? So what multiplies to give you 12? Well, 1 times 12 gives you 12. 1 plus 12 gives us 13. We're not even close. We could have, to get a positive here, we could have 2 positives or we could have 2 negatives. But if we change the sign, all we're going to get is negative 13, okay? Let's try another combination, right? 2 and 6. When we add those together, what do we get? We get 8. Well, we got the right number, but the wrong sign. So change the signs. So those are going to be negative 2 and negative 6 multiplied to give you positive 12. When we add them, they give us negative 8. So those are the combinations we're looking for. Okay? So they become our second terms of our binomials. So negative 2 is one of them. And negative 6 is the other. Whoops, I wrote negative 2 again. Negative 6. Doesn't matter the order. You could put the negative 6 first and the negative 2 after, but they have to be the second term. And then we factor the first term. So x squared becomes x times x. So we're going to put x in the front of both of those, 1x in each. Again, 3 marks. 1 mark for our GCF and 2 marks for the correct binomials. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, I do have one more. Oh, this is a most difficult one. The numbers are bigger. And again, we've got a negative in the first term. Okay, so we're going to factor out that negative. Okay, so I'm just going to write it down so to remind me to factor out the negative. I'm going to break this down so we can factor 4 into 2 times 2. X cubed gives us 3 x's, and y squared gives us 2 y's. Okay? 48 breaks down into 2 times 24, but 24 is not prime, right? 24 breaks down into 2 times 12. 12's not prime. Then 12 breaks down into 2 times 6, and 6 isn't prime, right? And then 6 breaks down into 2 times 3. Okay, then what do we have? We have x squared, so that's x times x, and y squared, which is y times y. Okay, moving on to the last term, 140 breaks down into 2 times 70. 70 breaks down into 2 times 35. And 35 breaks down into 5 times 7. Okay, so we factored that down. And then what do we have? We have x times y times y. So what is common? Okay. I see 2 2's here, 2 2's there, and another 2 there. So 2 2's is going to multiply back together to give us a 4. Okay. And then what do we have in most? 3 x's, 2 x's, 1. So all we can take out is a 1 because we have to be able to take it out of all 3. So the x's are going to go out. And then what about y's? We've got 2 y's in each. Okay, so that's going to be y squared. Now what's left goes in the bracket. Now remember, we factored out this negative, so our signs on all of these are going to change. So it's going to be a positive, and a positive, okay? because all three were negative there when we divide by a negative. So what's left? I see x squared, because it's x times x. I see 2 times 2 times 3. So 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 3 is 12. And there's also an x there, so 12x. And then here I see 5 times 7, which is 35. Okay. So now, this is our sum, and this is our product. Okay, so I'll put those here. Product is positive 35, and a sum is positive 12. Okay, so how do we break down 35? 35 is, well, simple one, 1 times 35. When we add those, we get 36. That's not right. Okay. Another way to get 35 is 7 times 5. When you add 7 and 5, what do you get? 12. Ah, worked out. Those are our numbers. Now remember the signs. These are going to be two positives. Give us a positive there. So breaking that trinomial into two binomials, the second terms are going to be positive 7 and positive 5. Don't forget, we need to bring down our GCF, so we're going to have negative 4xy squared. And then this x squared term breaks down into x times x, so the first of those terms are going to be x. Again, 3 marks, 1 for the GCF and 1 for each of the binomials. Okay, we are seriously done. All right, good luck with the assignment. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you soon.